Folks, if you're anything like me,
a nerd!
Folks, if you're anything like me, a lot of your comic journey probably revolved around the big two, aka Marvel and DC. Now, this is not an insult, this is not a problem per se. Personally, this year and the last 2 or so years, I've been more and more weaning away from Marvel and DC. It has less to do with the quality of the books as it has to do with just the direction the company wants to go with these stories. These are stories that can never end because they make money. Like, a lot of people try to act like this never-ending loop story idea is some type of artistic, integral part of comics, and therefore it can never change and shouldn't change. But in reality, it's only never ending because it keeps making money. Spider-Man had a long period of growth, depending who you ask, then all of a sudden it just stopped. And now he's stuck in being this loop of perpetual, like, 28-something-year-old who never gets married and never gets laid and yada yada yada. And the reason behind that isn't Marvel going like, oh, this is really what the art's about. We're here to tell a fundamental story about being stuck in a loop of time and aging and being afraid of the future constantly, and that's relatable. That's not what they're doing it. They're doing it because, like, oh yeah, this makes money. Every time we put out a new #1, we make $500,000 extra dollars. Why would we not do that once a year? And on top of that, it keeps the character quote unquote relatable. New readers are always supposed to be coming in, so if you have a character that's always approachable with a new status quo starting point, I mean, it speaks for itself. Now, in the past few videos, I've talked on length about this enough. I'm not going to go into a huge thing about it, but all that to say, personally, for me, I've been weaning a lot more away from Marvel and DC because I just can't get behind these kinds of stories anymore. There's still a lot of diamonds in the rough, but for the most part, a lot of these stories are just kind of like, I'm not really learning anything new about myself, about the characters. I'm not really feeling any type of huge emotions. And I'm starting to look more and more for stories that are going to speak to me and challenge me in some type of way, or at the very least challenge the art form. All that to say, there's a huge world outside of Marvel and DC in terms of comics, and I want to introduce a small section of that for you. I've spoken to a lot of people who read comics and they only read Marvel and DC because those are the characters they grew up with and the characters they love, and there's like a lot of safety there. To go out and explore is dangerous because you might get hurt, you might not like what you find, and then there's like a money incentive in there. So I get it, it's a really risky thing to just go out. But for me, I love exploring. I think it's so fun to try something new and to just see where it leads me. So today's video in a nutshell is about us moving away from Marvel and DC. Your motivations for why you want to do that might be different. For me, it's really more about exploring the wider avenue of comics. And I've been doing that a lot recently, so I want to share some of my picks for what can help you find love outside of the big two. Can you tell that wasn't scripted? Can you tell this whole thing's not scripted? If you could see the behind the scenes of how much time I put into editing this down to something concise and readable and editable, you would be amazed. My last video was 40 minutes long. I have 2 hours of footage that I filmed for that. Can you believe that? 15 minutes of that was me on the phone with my dad. I'm not a professional, I'm just here for a hobby. I'm doing my best. Without further ado, here's some comics that I think will help you find new life in comics outside of the big two. Now you're probably sitting there thinking, oh, is he gonna do that bit he did for the past 3 videos where he kind of just sits there and waits for the beat to drop, but the beat doesn't drop until he goes like, oh my god, where's the beat? Is the beat gonna drop now? And then it drops in the middle of a sentence? Well, the answer won't surprise you. Now before we get into the actual recommendation of comics, I just want to take this second to say that I think the best way to explore and experience comics is to find creators you like and follow them. Now there's nothing wrong with following characters, but I do feel like a lot of people get stuck on following these characters so badly that they continue to follow them through mud. I think Spider-Man is the best example of a character who consistently has runs that are controversial to say the least. I know a lot of people who were just like complaining about the state of Spider-Man, and then I was like, well, are you still reading? And they're like, yeah, of course. Well, there's your problem, buddy. And I get it, this character speaks to you, you invested so much time to this character, but folks, if something's not bringing you joy and it's a book, drop the book. That's money. That's time, that's energy. These are all valuable things in not only our society, but in our mental health. So take care of yourself and just read something you enjoy. There's plenty of books that are just as fun and just as exciting as Spider-Man. You just have to take that leap and trust that you'll find something in time. So for me, I've really been enjoying following creators I like, because for me, that's why I really like these characters. I like Spider-Man because Jerry Conway wrote a very relatable character. So why wouldn't I try to follow the creator who made the character likable? No disrespect to Stan Lee, except for all disrespect to Stan Lee. So for me, a lot of the time, I'm just following creators around. I know a lot of people follow Jonathan Hickman into different superhero stuff and they trust him very blindly. And there's a reason behind that. He proved his worth to these people. Between Fantastic Four, Secret Wars, X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, people trust this guy for a reason. And to me, there's a few creators like this. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are a duo that I'll always follow everywhere no matter what. They could put a pile of shit in front of me and I'd dig my hands into it trying to find the story. Rick Remender is another person like this. I always love his stories. Jeff Lemire always has the most human stories. He gets down to the humanity of these characters that he builds in these worlds, and I think it's very fundamental writing and it works so beautifully. I think most recently I've been enjoying following Juni Ba, who's been very experimental. He brings a different type of energy to Western comics, and it's all thanks to his background. He's from France, but he's also West African, and so he puts both of those influences into his story. So if you've been recently reading stuff and you're like, wow, I love Ultimate Spider-Man, I love Absolute Batman, I love this or that, go check out who's creating them and try to find other works by them. And if they do something unique, give it a shot. The first book I want to recommend is Usagi Yojimbo. I'm recommending this book because it's my favorite book of all time, and I genuinely think it's the best comic of all time. Usagi Yojimbo is by Stan Sakai, and when I say by, I mean it's by him. He writes it, he draws it, and he letters it. Three things that normally don't go together. Recently they added a colorist to the team, and I think the colorist had finally found their groove and is doing a really good job as well. But Stan Sakai is very clearly the soul behind this character. He's been writing this character since the 80s, and it's almost at the point where it's going to become the longest ongoing or running indie comic of all time. And again, with good reason. Usagi Yojimbo follows a Ronin rabbit, which is masterless samurai, as he embarks on a warrior's journey or pilgrimage across feudal Japan. There's a lot of reasons why I like this book. The first reason is that it's a samurai story, and I'm very big into westerns and samurais. Obviously there's like a coolness factor around them, but they're always able to tell these vignettes and stories that really speak to like the soul of humanity, I feel like. But Usagi Yojimbo does this even better because you watch this character who's at this point supposed to be kind of static. He already went through the whole samurai story. He had a master, he fought a war, his master died, and now he's a Ronin wandering across Japan doing what he needs to survive and reach a sense of enlightenment. But we could actually see him change in different ways as he gets challenged in perspectives he wouldn't expect. Usagi is a character who is genuinely a good person, but also struggles with his own tendencies. When he was a child, he was very selfish and hot-headed, and that really didn't go away per se as an adult. It just kind of changed and mellowed out a little bit. There's still big bursts of moments where he gets super frustrated or super angry or super excited, and it brings out this other side of him that makes him not so static but very dynamic. And beyond that, we get to watch all these different characters surround him, and through these different characters we learn more about him and the world. I love pretty much everyone in this story except for one son of a bitch bastard who I hate to the core. This motherfucker, if I ever catch this motherfucker, best believe I'm running the other way. I'm not fighting this dude. This dude scares the hell out of me. There's very few times an antagonist will generally make me go, oh no, not you again, and mean it not in a like, oh brother type of way, but in a, I don't want to see you here. I'm terrified of what you can do to these characters. And this motherfucker, I hate him. And the other aspect of it I like is that Sakai is so methodical in his research. He puts in the research so that you really get involved and engulfed in what it was like back then. One of the issues, for example, which is one of my favorite issues, is literally just a tea ceremony. You get to see a samurai go through a full tea ceremony, and it's something that's just like really quiet and a very big moment for the characters though. I think it's really impressive to be able to take something that's ceremonial and make it a character moment where two characters are wrestling with something else inside of them, and you get to see that play out through something that is just a ritual. Also, it's a samurai rabbit. I don't know why I have to pitch this anymore. If you don't want a samurai rabbit story, I don't know what you want. This is the best we can do. We can't do anything else. There's nothing else we could do that's better than this idea of a story. Anyway, I could really just do a whole video on Usagi Yojimbo, and I probably will one day, but for now, this is where I'm gonna lead you at. I was thinking about putting these stories in different categories, but I really don't have one, but I do wanna recommend some other comics that in some way relate to the stories that I'm recommending. So with Usagi Yojimbo, I also want to recommend Vagabond, Conan, and Grendel. Conan's another Wanderer story that's been ongoing for a long time with different writers behind it. It's another story where you get a lot of vignettes and you get to see a big character study of someone that you're just following for a long time who is technically static, but feels dynamic because of the world he's inhabiting. Vagabond is a retelling of the story of Miyamoto Musashi, who is the inspiration for Usagi Yojimbo. I think Vagabond's incredible book. The art alone speaks for itself, but there's a lot of brevity in the book as well as there is big kinetic dynamic energy. That's a book I blew through in a week. It's like very dense, but it's such a good read that you kind of just like trailblaze through it. And finally, Grendel I don't have a lot of experience with, but it's another comic that has a long ongoing. The beginning is very prose heavy, which was like a big barrier for me. Just personally, I'm a very slow reader, so if you put a lot of words in front of my comic book, I'm just going to take a longer time to read it. That's a personal failure, not the books. If you want to take the next dive into comics in a fantasy way, I have to recommend Mouse Guard and Bone. These are two books that are wildly different but also exactly the same in my eyes. I think they're both very introductory level comics, but they're perfection in the craft of comics. Let me start over. There's nothing wrong with being introductory. That's not why I'm saying they're introductory. I think they're introductory, like everything else in this, because you can just leap into them and get engulfed into this bigger story. And they do a very good job of not holding your hand per se, but of like kind of grabbing you and being like, hey, come on, this way, this way. And that goes for pretty much everything that you're going to see in this video, which is why we're doing this video. But Bone is something I grew up with. I remember going to Scholastic Book Fair and finding Bone out there, and getting the first volume because it had a funny white dude on it. I was a big Jim Carrey fan at the time, so I loved funny white dudes. But Bone follows a set of bones. But Bone follows three guys who are bones. I don't know how to say that. How do I say that? They're bone. They're bone people. But the three bones basically are out of Boneville. That's what you hear what I'm saying? I sound crazy. I'm just gonna read the actual description for the first volume and just let it go. Meet the Bone Cousins, Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone, the three misfits who are run out of Boneville and find themselves lost in a vast, uncharted desert. They make their way into a deep forested valley filled with wonderful and terrifying creatures. With the help of the mysterious Thorn, her tough-as-nails grandma Ben, and the great red dragon, the boys do their best to survive in the middle of brewing trouble between the valley's denizens. It's a very fun book. The cartooning in it is perfection. You're not gonna see pretty much any better from anywhere else. And it's a nice fantasy story about destiny, which I heard is something that a lot of people are into. Personally, didn't like the game that much, but Mouse Guard is a more recent find, by which I mean I started reading it a week ago, but I love it so much. It's another book that feels very all ages. I think anyone could really get into this, but what makes it so special for me is that the art is just fantastic. It's breathtaking. I mean, I read comics digitally nowadays, and this is a comic that was so good in the art direction that it made me go, do I need to get this for my coffee table? Is this something I need to get like printed out somewhere? This one follows four mice who are a part of a mouse guard in this kingdom of mice. The writer Peterson started with just the idea of like, if mice had a kingdom, where would they go and what would they do? And it just expanded from there. So you have these underground mice kingdoms, you have this history of these weasels and an evil weasel leader king. You have a mouse guard that was originally intended to protect the kingdom, but now that the threat of war is kind of over, they're more just to make sure that everyone is following order and safe. They go out and they do some foraging, they go out and they'll like do investigations if a mouse goes missing. And it's just a really thought out system. You can see how they get water, you see their inner turmoils of politics, their history. I'm not the biggest fantasy guy, so sometimes it's a hard sell for me to get really invested into a fantasy story, but I've been so in love with this story and it makes me want to read more fantasies, which my girlfriend would love to hear because I'm sure she really wants me to read like Glass of Throne of Stone or whatever it's called, or at least like the fourth Akatar book, which I probably should. I like those books enough. I should read the fourth one. And I heard the fifth one's about Nessa, who is like the best character. What do you mean her name's not Nessa? Who's Nessa? 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 If you're looking to explore a fantasy setting, I feel like these two are the best starter points for going to fantasy comics. But once you're past those, there's a lot of other fantasy comics to get into. If you're looking for like epic stories, Monstrous and Saga are like the go-to, I feel like. Monstrous is not for everyone. This is a grim, dark story, and they mean it. Saga's another one that's not for everybody, but I think it's for a lot of people. It's a bestseller for a reason. Personally, I don't like it that much, but some of my best friends love it, and it's because the comic is just very fun, it's well written, it looks great, and it just, again, drags you along. Some two lesser known ones are Coda and Headlopper. These are two comics that I love. Coda, I'll be honest, didn't catch me right away. Like the first half of volume 1, I just was not into it at all, but then something clicked all of a sudden and then I was just breezing through it. It's a very fun, colorful story and I love it so much. And Headhopper is a comic that could have gone in this section or the Usagi Yojimbo section because it's another one that is like this wanderer story with a fantasy element to it. It's very fun, it's a very cartoon book, but that doesn't mean it's like unserious or anything. It has very serious moments at times, it has very silly and stupid moments at times. It's the best of both worlds. I love these comics. Monkey Meat is a very clear satire on capitalism. It's about an island where a company called Monkey Meat Company. It takes place on an island where the Monkey Meat Company that made its riches off of selling processed meat now inhabits the island and basically has turned it from this, you know, beautiful indigenous land to a capitalism fever pitch dream. I sound like a TikTok book reviewer now. Fever pitch. Every time, a little side rant for a second. Every time I go on TikTok and I look at like the book talk section of it, every time someone's recommending a horror novel, they always go, oh, it's so good. First they're doing this, then there's a ghost, and then it devolves to this fever pitch nightmare. There's got to be a different way of saying that. We can't just all be saying that all the time. I swiped through like 7 in a row that all just had that at some point in the video. Is that the best way to describe it? Probably. Should we find something new? Yes. I'm part of the problem because I just did it and I'm not cutting it from the video. Monkey Meat is like an anthology, so every issue is a different unique story. There's always a hopping on point, and that's kind of the theme of this section is anthology or, you know, kind of one shot or hop in stories. I like this one a lot because it's very wacky. I also just love Juniba's art. I think it's very fun, it's very unique. There's a lot of influence he takes from his culture, and it's like the biggest and best argument for why we need diversity in the comic industry and other industries. Because if we didn't have it, you would never see an artist like this pop into the mainstream per se, because we're not giving them the opportunities. You might see copycats and similar things down the road, but because we're allowed to diversify our comics a little bit, we get to see these more diverse takes on stories and get new stories. I don't really have too much to say about Monkey Meat, to be honest. I think it's very fun, I like it a lot, and I'm glad it's coming back, but it's one of those comics I'm kind of like, oh, I really enjoyed this and the themes that it's exploring. I don't have much more to say on this besides I agree. The other two comics I want to highlight in this section are Ice Cream Man and Love and Rockets. Love and Rockets is one that I've honestly not read a lot of. I tried one volume of it and it just did not speak to me whatsoever. However, everyone else seems to love it. I've heard that each volume is different and I've looked into it and that's been the case, and every time I watch a video about them talking about these comics, I'm always like, that sounds so good and so great and I love that idea and this and that, but I just can't get into it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a shot. You should try it out. I think there's a lot of value in there, and you look at the art and I'm like, the art, it speaks to me as someone who grew up with Archie comics a lot. I love this style of cartooning. On the other hand, Ice Cream Man, I love this comic. This might be my favorite newer modern ongoing comic. Ice Cream Man is everything. It's funny, it's sad, it's scary, it's existential, it's traumatizing, it's relieving. Maxwell Pritz and Martin Morazzo are just firing on all cylinders. It's such an experimental book where each issue you just don't know what you're getting yourself into and you just don't know what the vibe's gonna be. Like one issue is this slow car crash and you're just watching like I think 5 or 6 people's lives flash before their eyes as they die, and it's so sad but it's so real. I very much love comics because we get to experiment in different ways. A lot of these you can't do on a regular basis for other mediums. TV shows get canceled all the time, movies don't want to put the money into the budget, but for a comic you can get the budget, you could get the time, and you could tell these experimental, unique type of experiences that can only happen in comic book. And this is a book that I pick up monthly. Every time it drops, I immediately pick it up. There's very few books I do that for, literally 2, and this is one of them. So I love this book. I think you should try this one out. It's not just scary, it is very sad though, and there's gonna be issues that make you put it down and have to take a walk. And next up is Invincible, and before you say anything, let me plead my case. First of all, I love Invincible. I think it's so fun, I think it's so cool, I think it's so sad. I think there's a lot of failures in the actual plot. I don't think everything lands perfectly in this comic. However, I do think it's such a standard starting point when you're going into comics or going through comics. If you don't know what Invincible is, it's about a boy who essentially is a young Superman, and he gets his powers and he finds out his dad is, actually maybe evil. And that's just like the first 6 issues. It's a very fun, very bloody, very sometimes problematic book. Invincible was one of the first comics that made me really fall back into love with comics. There was like this extent of time as a kid where comics were kind of waiting and I would just like peek in every once in a while. But Usagi Yojimbo, Ultimate Spider-Man, and Invincible were at the foundation of rebuilding my love for this medium. And the thing that works for me for Invincible is that it is this step away from Marvel and DC. It's trying to do some things that Marvel and DC can't do, while also paying homage to what came before it. Like Invincible very clearly does parodies of character. There's a discount Batman. He literally meets Spider-Man and Batman at one point and he makes fun of their names. But it always feels tongue-in-cheek. It never feels like a book that's like, I'm better than these other books. It always feels like I want to be the best and I only did that because of these other books. So it's half paying homage, half poking fun at itself and these other books that it's very clearly inspired by. But what I think makes this work so well as a next step out of Marvel and DC is that it isn't Marvel and DC. This is a comic that initially wasn't designed to have an end, but clearly has a beginning, middle, and end. You can see the progression of this character, you can see the turmoil, there's starting on points, there's refreshers, but it's always moving forward. And that's something that Marvel and DC doesn't do a lot of anymore. But Invincible was able to do that. It was able to make you think this character is continuing to grow, there's an end point in mind for this character, and all these story beats will mean something in the end. And for the most part, it does. I know a lot of people don't love the ending. I am hit or miss on it depending on when you ask me. But it does have an ending that feels like everything comes to a completion point. Also, it's really fun. I think the one thing that I wish it did better, well, there's a few things I wish it did better, but the one big thing I wish it did better was discussing Mark Grayson's rape. So Mark does get raped in this comic, and the way they use it, I think, isn't as mature as it should have been. Like, sexual assault on men isn't really discussed as much in society as we need to discuss it. A lot of times it's treated as a joke, sometimes it's treated as a reward, like with all these, you see an old movie where they're talking about like, I'm trying to get with the teacher, and they sleep with the teacher, it's like this cool high five moment. And this isn't even new to the industry of comics. Nightwing has gotten sexually assaulted and raped multiple times in his own books, and it feels like there's never actually a bigger conversation that happens after these incidents happen. Sometimes it's played off as just being like a soap opera drama moment, and other times it feels like editorial or something came along and just said like, yeah, we're not gonna actually go into it though, but you could show it. And as a kid, I was recognizing this but not really knowing how to process or talk about it yet, and Invincible was the first time I saw a comic actually try to address it, and for a long time I thought it was like the golden standard for this conversation. Clearly now I know better, it's very much flawed and I think it handles it very poorly, but I want to give like the small credit it deserves, or that it's trying to have a conversation that's very serious and a problem not just for comics but also for men in society in general. So I wish I handled that better. I also think that Adam Eve gaining weight was used as a shock moment, which was really strange, but then was quickly embraced as an okay thing for the character to go through. And I thought that was also almost well handled. Again, the shock moment part of it, like it's literally a page turn where you turn the page and she's fat. You're supposed to go like, whoa, what happened? And it's clearly that's what you're supposed to think based on the presentation of the page. I wish if they cut that out, I feel like the rest of it was pretty adult. Like a character gained weight because she was going through a lot. I won't get into like the actual details, but she was not having a good time at all. She was very lonely, she was depressed, and she gained weight. It happens. And I think it was really cool to see Mark step in and be like, hey, it's okay. I think you look great still. I think you look beautiful. You're still the woman I love. So again, we have these moments in this comic where we're like almost hitting the mark on something and then just totally fumbling it in one way or another. So I'm very hopeful the show does a better job with this. Only time will tell though. And the reaction that a lot of people are having already with the introduction of some of these characters and beats, I don't know if we're gonna have a great time with this, but it's a conversation that needs to happen at some point, I think. So a big thing about this section is that these are superhero stories that are in conversation with other superhero stories. So you're coming from Marvel and DC and you're like, what comic should I do next? Well, I like superheroes. what other superhero stuff can I like? So that's where Invincible comes in. Other recommendations would be Astro City, that's a big one, a long one. Black Hammer, I think, is my favorite modern superhero story right now. I really like how it plays with the medium. The base plot of the first few volumes is that these superhero characters get trapped in a small town, and then it becomes like this small town mystery of how these characters got there and how they would get out and what complacency looks like in a superhero story. I think the art's fantastic. I think the story's fantastic. It's by Jeff Lemire, again, one of my favorite writers. So it's a very human story that I really found relatable, but also unique. And as the story goes on, it really calls back to Marvel and DC and the comics that came before them. And it really feels like a love letter to the medium while standing alone as its own unique thing and area to explore. There's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of spin-offs, there's so much to explore. If there's a character you find interesting, they probably have a spin-off or a one-shot story to follow through with. A comic I haven't read yet, but I'm really excited to, is 20th Century Men. It's another story that uses superheroes to talk about modern day fascism and imperialism. That's a story that's unfortunately always relevant, whether it's Watchmen or Ultimates or this. So it's a comic I'm really excited to dive into, especially after reading Dennis Camp's Ultimates series that's ongoing right now. But I just haven't had the time yet or the energy, so I really can't say too much about it. But if you want to learn more about it, you can watch this video by friend of the podcast, friend of the YouTube channel, Comic Crackle. Click the link. I mean, right click the link. Don't actually stop this video to watch this. Watch his video later. My video is more important right now because I'm talking, and it'd be really rude. Actually, yeah, it would be really rude if you just went to a different video right now. Matter of fact, if you go to a different video right now, don't call. I never watched that movie. Is that the meme? This next section is going to be some comics that are slice of life-ish. They're not exactly slice of life comics, but they're close enough, and they are usually slice of life with a twist. Focus of this section is going to be Dinosaur Sanctuary. I love this comic, and I know what you're thinking. That's not a comic, it's a manga. However, it's literally part of a comic club, so fuck you. Dinosaur Sanctuary is in a world where dinosaurs have not gone extinct. They were brought back and they're now in zoos in basically what if Jurassic Park was successful. However, like a decade or two ago, an incident happened that caused dinosaurs to be seen and feared again, and so the popularity of these tourist centers have declined. We follow a new zookeeper or dinosaur keeper, I can't remember exactly what they're called, as she starts a job at a famous dinosaur sanctuary. What I like most about this is that it's very standard beginner manga. You kind of know what you're getting yourself into. It's a story about people operating a dinosaur zoo. That's what they do, and it's so well done. First of all, the art is so fun. I love the character models, but more importantly, the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are so cool. Dinosaurs are just cool. I don't know, dinosaurs are just cool. What if we all just like dinosaurs again? Whatever happened to liking dinosaurs? Remember when everyone just had a favorite dinosaur that they always were just like, this is my dinosaur. No, this is my dinosaur. Why do we argue about other stuff that's not dinosaurs? We should be talking about who would win a fight, this guy or whatever the fuck this is. Anyway, what I love most about this story is that it's about caring. We follow a zookeeper who just cares about not just dinosaurs, but humans as well, but also dinosaurs. And so we get to meet these different dinosaurs and they become characters of their own. They're not just there as set piece and dressing. We get to learn about them. We learn about Triceratops, who's past his prime and is no longer popular. We learn about Dilophosaurus, who has gout, and they have to slowly realize that. We learn with them too, is the most exciting part. At the end of each issue, there's a letter from the consultant that goes over different tidbits and facts about dinosaurs. It's like you're at school again, except for not the boring days, but the fun days where the teacher rolls out the TV and you get to watch Bill Nye or Miss Frizzle. Miss Frizzle. I'm sorry, what were we talking about? So it is like a slice of life because we are in the day and the life of these zookeepers essentially, but it has that unique flavor to it. It's not just a slice of life, it's slice of life-ish, but with excitement added to it. Not to say that slice of lives can't be fun. I love a good slice of life. It doesn't need a fantasy element to be exciting or fun, but these ones I think are better for the introductory into if you want to go the slice of life route. And so for this one, I also want to recommend Scott Pilgrim. You probably know what that is. You've probably seen the movie. It's about a guy who has to fight his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes. It's very punchy, it's fun, it's another one that's like, we are a cartoon, we are a comic, and we're proud of it. There's a lot of love to video games in it, there's a lot of love to culture, and I think it's just a fun, personal story. Giant Days and Octopus Pie are also two stories that I love. These are both actually pretty much just slice of lives, but they are very cartoony as well. Giant Days follows 3 girls in university, while Octopus Pie follows 2 retail workers. They both started as web series, but I love both of these books. Octopus Pie and Giant Days are very personal stories, very funny, but also very sad. They don't scare away from trying to have deeper conversations. My favorite issue of Giant Days is about someone grieving, essentially, but quietly and then suddenly out in a loud burst. They're very human stories told through a lens of a cartoon, and I think that's what makes them so approachable and easy for me to dive into. Lastly is entirely different, Dr. McNinja. I have no place to put this one, so that's why I put it here. It's not really a slice of life at all, but it's also not fantasy. It doesn't fit into any of the other categories, but Dr. McNinja is another web series that I loved. It's about a ninja doctor. It's a doctor who's a ninja. It's about a ninja who's a doctor. His secretary is a gorilla. He has a sidekick who's a cowboy who rides on a raptor. He fights Ronald McDonald. It's the best. It's a great comic. It's so good and you should read it. Next, we're going noir. We're going cool. We're going slow, savvy. We're going with Parker. Parker is a comic that's not going to be for everyone, but it's going to be for you. It's very stylish. It's very kind of mean-spirited. It's very noir. If you don't know what noir is, it's like mystery, essentially. It's a thriller. It's old. Parker is a piece of shit bastard. He's a rat bastard, and I hate him. He's a bad person, and goddamn if he's not fun to follow around. There's a certain art in being able to make a character that's totally unlikable interesting enough to follow. Parker is about a guy named Parker who just came back from the dead essentially and is seeking revenge. More importantly, he just wants his money. If everyone just gave him his money, he'd probably fuck off, but no one wants to give him his money, so he's out for revenge essentially. You get to see what this bastard of a man is like in all of his glory and all of his worstness. But what makes this really pop as a story is definitely Darwin Cook's art. Darwin Cook had to fight to make this story happen, and I'm glad he did because what we got is a masterclass in storytelling through visuals. The usage of shadows, I think, is my most favorite part of these books. I am lucky enough to have the Martini edition, which is like a book that's this fucking big. It's huge. Parker's originally a novel and Darwin Cook is adapting this. And I think he does a great job of not just fitting the style of a noir, but also making it unique in its own. At the same time, he really lets the dialogue sing when it needs to sing, but also pulls it back when it's time for the art to do its thing. It's a very strong balance and not one easy at all to pull off. And I can only just applaud Cook for doing it because I don't think anyone else could have possibly nailed this the way he did. So if you're a fan of Darwin Cook, this is the next book for you. If you're a fan of like Jonah Hex, this is the next book for you. But I think this is a good introduction into a noir field if you want to go that direction for comics. This might not be the best starting point. You might have more luck with something a little lighter. But I think if you're looking for a mystery or noir, you really can't start any better. But if you are going that direction, I would recommend other comics like Black Sod, which is another anthropomorphic story about a is he a puma? He's like a cat. I think he's a puma. He's a puma that's very clearly supposed to be played by Idris Elba. In another noir setting, again, the art really sells this one too. If you like neo-noirs, you really can't go wrong with the Ed Brubaker-Sean Phillips duo. They have dozens of books together at this point, and I could point you at any of them. My favorite is Kill or Be Killed, and also Pulp, but there's a lot of books like Criminal to go into, and they are really kind of the gold standard for Western neo-noir stories. Selfishly, I also have to recommend A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance because I love Rick Remender, and I think this is a very unique story in the way it presents itself. It doesn't give you information, it wants you to pick up on the story. You're kind of just dropped into this mystery, and you have to just go with it. Either you go with it or you fall behind. I think that's a very brave choice. The art really sells the book, and I really like that Remender lets the art speak for itself. And lastly, I want to talk about probably the greatest comic of all time, Hellboy. A lot of you have probably heard of Hellboy from the movies, a lot of you have probably heard of Hellboys from the movies again, and very few of you probably heard it from the movies again. But Hellboy is a love song not just to comics but to culture and mythology in general. Mike Mignola really goes all out to explore every element of mythology he can. If you don't know the story of Hellboy, it starts with a Hellboy appearing on Earth. after being summoned by Rasputin and some Nazis. And it really starts as this kind of story of a Hellboy child fighting against these occultist Nazis. But by the end, you have this beautiful exploration of mythology across the globe, from werewolves to mermaid, but also to like a Nazi and to African folklore and Japanese folklore and Swedish folklore, like everywhere it goes. It's really what comics are about. One guy obsessed with one thing and making it everyone else's problem. Mike Mignola really wanted to draw European architecture and said, all right, I'll do a whole thing about this. And then he was just like, actually, I want to talk about other mythologies now. Actually, I want to talk about Africa. Actually, I want to draw a lion really badly. And this comic is really good. And I think it's a great jumping on point for new comics because of multiple reasons. One, it's really different from what you were going to get from the big two. This is a very prose heavy book, especially towards the beginning, but that's a part of the beauty of it. It feels poetic, it feels large and epic and long, and it's a very quiet but loud book. The art's beautiful, it's static, it's dynamic, it's kinetic, it's a paradox. The whole book feels like what comics are about, making something flat feel alive. And Hellboy is just this beautiful journey of self-discovery and fighting against destiny. And I think it's something that we can all really speak to and enjoy. And on top of that, there's a bunch of spin-offs to it. You could read about the BPRD, which is like the FBI occultist group that Hellboy works for a time. You could read about some of his villains he fights later on and their backstory. And it's just this web of stories that you could get lost into. So if you're looking for a story that's going to lead to more stories, if you're one of those people who are like, I really like the continuity of Marvel and DC, but it never felt real or like it all connected, or that it was too hypocritical or paradoxical, this is one that's really thought out and where everything just builds on top of each other and layers and overlaps, but always feels separate while connected. It's beautiful. It's what humanity is all about, I think. So in this section, I would recommend other things. Pretty Deadly is another comic that's a mixture of mythology, folklore, and genre. It's a Western horror comic, and I think it's very beautifully drawn, but also it's a great exploration of folklore and mythology. I think Bitterroot is another good comic that plays with the art medium a lot, while also telling a story that's kind of redefining what mythology can be. Very clearly, mythology is kind of the encompassing feel of this one, except for one comic. East of West is another one. This one's by Jonathan Hickman, so if you're looking for that easy jump of a creator from like Secret Wars to something else you'll love. I love East of West a lot. It's with Nick Dragata, who you know from Absolute Batman, and it's this weird, sad, cold comic that ends in a hopeful blaze. And then kind of breaking the mythology, I want to also recommend Dread in this section. Dread could have fit in like multiple sections because it's like a long ongoing, but this is one that I think also really does continuity really well because it's a never-ending long story. You follow this fascist society behind the eyes of a cop who is the law, and it offers this satire that gives us a lens into fascism in our society. And it's very interesting reading it, especially as a long ongoing that never ends essentially, because you have this story that's set in the far future, but it was written back in like the 80s at first, and it's been going on to modern day, and yet despite all of that, nothing's really changed. The messages are exactly the same: of fear of government overstepping, of policing too harshly, of laws becoming something more attuned to morality or ethics. And I'm really putting it in this section because of the longevity, but also because I think it's one of those stories like Hellboy that really helped define what comics can do. Hellboy had a much later start and really got its hype in the 90s and then continued on to the early 2000s. But I think it really brought to a more mainstream idea of prose-heavy comics can still work and be entertaining. I think a lot of comics around the same time Hellboy was coming out weren't trying to do this big artistry sweep. They were trying to bring in commercialization. Marvel was going this direction, DC was going this direction, Image Comics was starting, and Hellboy was standing there being like, no, we can still be artsy-fartsy with it. And similarly, Dread has had this long tradition of being like, we're getting straight to the point, we're telling this satirical, kind of westernish story, and we're hoping that the themes are coming through and you can really feel the essence of what we're trying to put down. So those are the comics I really wanted to talk about today. I really love these comics, and they're comics that helped me really define my taste in what I wanted to explore in comics. Because for me, what I love most about comics is that there's so much that could be done. Because comics can be made cheaper than movies or TVs, I feel like they're able to do a lot more experimentation. There's a lot more experimentation in storytelling and genre tropes and just trying to throw shit at the wall and see what works. I think modernly in Western comics, besides Ice Cream Man, which I think is like the gold standard right now for how to do experimentation in comics and really try to move the medium forward while also just trying out new techniques. I think the Silver Coin also did this very well. The artist Michael Walsh curated a bunch of different writers and asked them to basically write a horror story for him to do as a one-shot for each issue, and he just got to flex his kind of creative muscles and try different techniques out and framing and pacing based on what the script said to do. And you kind of see this sometimes in like TV or movies or even like novels, but there's something special about how pacing happens in comics and how lettering influences how a story is told, how colors change things, how movement has to be shown or not shown. All these different choices make comics its own medium that really makes it highlight different emotional aspects that can only be brought out through comics. So I love this medium, and I think there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of fun stuff happening and challenging things happening around the big two that the big two is just really not included in. And honestly, the comics I listed are also not at the forefront of these challenges. Like, I was naming a bunch of comics that are kind of mainstream in their own right. Maybe you didn't hear of Ice Cream Man before, but it's by Image Comics, which is basically the big three. Like, there's Marvel, DC, and then Image. And then you have all these other publishers like Boom and IDW, and they make up this Western market. And even if I go further down, like if I go to Mad Cave or Magma Comics, we're getting more and more into creator-owned and indie comics. However, they're still not the place where the real experimentation is usually happening. I think if we're talking about like really independent type of comics where experimentation is starting to happen, the closest we can look at is Fantagraphics. Fantagraphics is not the most popular publisher, and it's usually just an indie critical darling, but that's where experimentation is really happening. Let's look at the work of Charles Byrne, for example. One day I was just exploring Comixology looking for a comic, and I found this comic that looked really interesting called Black Hole. And I had no idea what it was about, but I saw the cover and there was just something so intriguing about it. And I tried to read it online, and it was only in French. And guys, I don't speak any other language because I'm dumb as fucking bricks. I mean, that's a true American way. Why would I learn another language when English good? So I added it to my wish list, and for years and years I waited for an English translation. Then one day I was in New York City just exploring a comic shop with my friend who was showing me around the town, and lo and behold, just sitting there was an English edition of it. I have no idea how long it was out. I just totally forgot about the book, and so I finally got my hands on it. And was it my favorite story of all time? No. Was it a story I even loved? No. But the art just spoke on a different type of level. There's something in the presentation, in the choices of delivery, of negative space, of the energy and vibe that the story's telling about basically what's an STD pandemic in this small town. And it just clutched onto me, this art alone, and there's something different about it, and I don't even know if I could to this day tell you exactly what it did differently. You can just feel the difference. It's a story that wasn't worried about world building or trying to like be appeasing or pleasing to the eye. It was a story that was just trying to tell you exactly what it had to tell you. And a lot of times it feels like publishers don't allow that, especially at the big two, where brand is where the money is at. Marvel and DC like to experiment, but at the end of the day, they are there to make money. And I don't think Fantagraphics is, as a company, that different, but they allow a lot more leeway. And it's very clear there that the money isn't the biggest motivator because they don't make that much money. And as you get more and more independent, that's really where you start to see the love for the medium really shine through. You have people who are not making a buck yet off of this stuff, but who just love the game. You have people on Indiegogo and Kickstarter just trying to get their comic out to anyone who will read it or pitching it for free online. Or your two brothers who have mini comics that you're trying to sell on the street. And I feel like that's where the wonder and experimentation and love really comes through. And that's not to say creators in the big 2 and 3 don't also have the love for the medium, but they definitely have their hands tied in a different way than you get when you're more and more independent. So all I'm trying to say is that comics are huge, and the comics I shared and the publishers I mentioned are not even a drop in the ocean. It's such a small scale onto what you can really experiment if you just go out there and try. And that's what I've been trying to do in the past year, and I'm really starting to push more for this year, is moving away from the comics I'm used to and going to places that are uncomfortable, that are new, that are different, that are experimentation. What's France doing? What's Africa doing? What's Asia doing? Those are places that I personally want to explore more this year. That's kind of my goal for the upcoming years or two, is I just want to experiment and have more fun in this medium. Is that going to affect my videos? I don't know. I think I still have a lot to say about Marvel and DC too, but I think I'm going to spread out a lot more in the variety of content I want to cover for the show. Channel, something. So I appreciate you guys joining me on this journey. I hope you guys saw something that really caught your eye and made you go, I want to check that out. There's a lot of great comics out there. I haven't even talked about most of the great ones, just some of them. If there's a comic out there that you think really can lead someone away from Marvel and DC and into the wider spectrum of comics, please feel free to share them in the comments below. I think people would really appreciate that. I know I would. My comic book wish list is never ending. It's like 1,005 strong, and it's always growing pretty much every other day. Now, I'm not gonna tell you to like and subscribe, but if you like this video, please, wouldn't you? Why don't you? Could be nice. Could have fun. Might even like it. Who knows? All right, bye. Folks, if you're anything like me, why would you say that? No, what made you say that? No, don't be serious for a second. Why would you say that to me? That was incredibly rude. You know that? Yeah. Is that why you were reading my script notes earlier? Is it because you were just like waiting for that bit? You just saw that I was gonna say that, and you're just like, oh, I have a space to fill in right here. You think you're funny? You think it's all just some joke to you? This is my life, man. This is who I am, and you're just ridiculing me for who I am, and then you just live under my roof. Eat my food, drink my water, my spit. This is how you repay me after all those years of kindness? I dug your ass out of the gutter and I could put you back there! Folks.